So, our first panel is entitled, What Kind of Organisations Do We Need to Really Take Control? And perfectly pitched to chair this panel is Ros Wynne-Jones, who is, among other things, the writer of the Mirror's Real Britain column, where every week she catalogues the effects of the cuts and she stands up for ordinary people. I'll hand over to her now to introduce the panel.
Hello, thanks for having me here today. I'm sure you're all Daily Mirror readers and very familiar with the column, but it gives me a quite sort of unique view, I think, on the country and the urgency of this kind of work, the work that I do, because I spend most of my time sort of in food banks and in kind of, you know, poor communities across the country. And for them, you know, I've just been at the Labour conference where there are people talking about the idea that the left's having an existential crisis. And I'd really like to take some of those people out into the communities that I go into where they can explain why they're having an existential crisis instead of actually trying to solve some of the, you know, some of these very, very key issues. So, and I think, you know, from what we've heard already from the delivery and city sprint riders, you know, this is an absolutely critical time for the left to kind of get its act together. So today, this first panel is about how do think tanks get beyond their own echo chamber. We're all of us here kind of live in our bubble. It's a very, very nice bubble. It's not the Westminster bubble. It's a different type of bubble. But it's about how do we emerge from that and listen and change society. So to help us look at that today, thinking about if we could create a think tank from scratch, how would we do it? We've got Danielle Walker-Palmour, who's been the director of Friends Provident Foundation since 2004. Previously director of policy and practice at Joseph Rowntree. Also been at the Big Lottery Fund, CRE Law Society. We've got Carolyn Mason, CBE, chief executive of the Esmée Fairbairn Foundation. Caroline was previously the Chief Operating Officer at Big Society Capital, Charity Bank, Investing for Good, and at Reuters. We've got Tom Kibasi, Director of IPPR, previously at McKinsey and Company, who helped to launch innovations in healthcare, working with social entrepreneurs around the world. And before that, he was at the Department for Health, where he worked on the acclaimed NHS review, High Quality Care for All. And finally, Sunder Katwala, the director of British Future and also a recovering journalist. He was a general secretary of the Fairbairns, previously a leader writer, internet editor at The Observer. So let's take Danielle first, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Danielle Walker-Palmour from Friends Provident Foundation, and Friends Provident is an independent charity. We were a corporate foundation, sort of, but the company doesn't exist anymore, but we're still around. And we are interested particularly in how we can have a fairer, more sustainable economy. And we're a core supporter of NEF. And I'm going to take the invitation to sort of start a fight, probably mostly with myself, because I'm not sure I actually even believe what I'm about to say. But I'm going to have a go. I'm making a case, and I'm quite willing to have it challenged. I think in terms of the types of organizations we need to bring about change in society, we need more explicitly mission-centric organizations. Organizations that define themselves in terms of their social function, their role in terms of their stakeholders, their employees, the environment they work in. They have to be really clear what they value. The need to think through in deep organizational terms how their mission and their values and behaviors within and of the organization manifest themselves. One of my trustees is Rob Lake, who's an investment advisor, and he, in a recent blog, said, what we value is what we pay attention to. And it's really about getting those explicit things that we value out there. Strangely, I think that charities, of which I've worked in the charity sector for some time, and foundations, and to some degree think tanks, can be very poor at being mission-centric. We very often get distracted by what we do instead of what we care about and what change we want to see. We often urge those, this is foundations particular, and particular ones like us from perhaps a particular persuasion, in this case it's a Quaker persuasion, to speak truth to power. Yet we have incredibly poor mechanisms for feedback, for hearing from beneficiaries, from hearing from grant holders, people we support. And I think what's interesting about the way NEF is working today is that actually it is showing its values by convening this actually over full room. I'm slightly worried about fire safety, but it's amazing. You want to hear what people have to say, and I hope that NEF and organizations that want to be fit for the future build ongoing structures to hear. So it's all very well to have one day, but what are the ongoing structures whereby NEF will hear from people in the future? I think there are some key principles, transparency, cultures of disclosure, and a recognition that we are all part of an ecosystem. We're not discrete organizations. So what we do and the way we do it has vital importance to other people and an impact on them. And I think that's one of the lessons, if we can, learn from this summer, and we will certainly learn on the 8th of November. We all understand how interconnected we are and how what we do matters to other people. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for listening. So I'm going to quickly just say, actually, I'm going to throw a couple of provocations, actually, which, again, I'm happy to have those challenged. But one is that, actually, maybe the thought of organisations is slightly a 20th century model. And maybe what we really need is to think about a new mindset. And what we really want is solutions. We need to build solutions. We need to skill up. And we also need to support collaborations a bit more. But to echo Danielle, that these need to be underpinned by real legitimacy, by community agency, and by user voice. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples of what I think that means. And then for us, anyway, as a funder, and also just to also echo the kind of the challenges that we have as a funder and also potentially as a sector. Examples are German boilermakers are now sending their staff to Silicon Valley because they know in the future that the future of plumbing is going to be embedded into walls and floors of buildings within the next 10 to 15 years. And so the plumbers of the future are not going to turn up and bang on some pipes and fix the gasket or whatever it is. They are going to have to analyze data. They're going to have to understand diagnostics. They're going to understand technology and data. And whether you're in education, skills, young people, environment, and housing, that's the realities of the future. And I don't think as a sector we are skilled, either as funders or as deliverers, to actually seize the opportunities that might bring to us. So I think there's a need to skill up. Secondly, collaborations. In Staffordshire, we see two hospitals who suddenly realised that there was a spike in admissions from older people in the winter. They realised that was because people were cold. They couldn't afford to heat their homes. So the local authority, the hospitals have teamed up with a community renewable energy supplier and a charity called Beat the Cold to try and all work together to reduce fuel poverty, make the homes warmer, and therefore reduce acute entry into hospital in the winter. And then in terms of solution, an example is the Durham Food Hub, who realised that there is a whole range of sustainable farms around Durham. They had a lot of local hospitals, schools, businesses, events, restaurants who really wanted to source their supplies from that local to keep things local. And so they've created a hub, an online hub by which that exchange can happen, but they've also partnered with a local SME which understands wholesaling and distribution. And that to me seems a hugely ingenious way to solve a problem. So for us as funders, it poses huge challenges. We are having to think beyond just grant making. We need to understand much more about what's happening on the ground. We need to be open to new models. We need to skill up ourselves, but also we need to know that we're part of the ecosystem, and we need to hear voices. We're currently hosting a session at ACF where we're trying to crowdsource feedback directly, anonymous feedback directly from organisations around the country. And the session is called Are Foundations Fit for the 21st Century? So if any of you want to take part in that, please do. We want to try and get as much as possible so that the voices of organisations on the ground are heard clearly around foundations. But I do think there's also a challenge for the sector. And the provocation I'm going to give is that, is this an echo chamber? Brexit showed that there are some very, 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 very difficult conversations to be had around the country, some really uncomfortable conversations to be had, and telling people that they're wrong, they're stupid, they're ignorant, they're racist for having voted in a particular way, I don't think is going to move us forward. So how do we bridge those gaps? I think we are in reset mode with government, and that offers us a huge opportunity. And I really, really hope that we take the opportunity to challenge ourselves, challenge government, and also take advantage of finding the extraordinary in what sometimes seems very, very ordinary. Thank you very much.
Tom.
Thank you. I came with very extensively prepared remarks scribbled on a bit of paper. So I suppose I would start from a place that I think you did, which was we've got to be a little bit careful about having too much angst about ourselves. I mean, I was at Conservative Party conference last week, and if there was one thing that was notably absent, it was any sense of angst. There was no lack of confidence in their ideas or confidence in their ability to make change happen. And I think that when you look at what's going on at the moment, we also need to be a little bit careful about getting into anti-politics and saying, well, you know, the left will just retreat from the political sphere altogether and we'll leave it uncontested because we will focus on community action and community organising and so on. So I think we've got to be a little bit careful in that. I mean, Brexit today, what we've heard, you know, a hard Brexit might cost the Exchequer £66 billion. That's 2/3 of the budget of the NHS. So whilst it's important to reduce emergency admissions by working with renewable energy companies, absolutely true, and I'm not denying the importance of that, we also should just be very careful not to retreat from the political sphere, because actually the funding of the NHS overall sets much more of the context and has a much bigger impact on everyone in society, whether the budget goes up by 0% in real terms, which is the current approach of the government, or goes up at a rate that is commensurate with the increase in demand. So I think that politics really matters, and I think it's really important as we have this discussion that we on the left don't retreat from those political contests. It seems to me, if I take the examples of Deliveroo, we also need to be a little careful on the left about how we approach these questions. I hear far too often, you know, just ban Deliveroo, ban Uber, these things are dreadful, resist, fight back. I think on the left, actually, we need to embrace these kind of technological innovations. We need to say this is absolutely fantastic that Uber now exists. It's wonderful that Deliveroo now exists. But we should also be saying, this isn't a new battle, this is an old battle. This is the old battle that we fought 100 years ago to say that piece rates are completely unacceptable and people should be paid a decent wage for a decent day's work. And I think, to me, it's pretty simple that these tech platforms are clearly tending towards monopoly because of the nature of technology. They should be regulated and they should be required to pay their drivers the London living wage for the time that they are available and willing to work, and that we should just be absolutely clear that we don't support piece rates. So the real question today was about the future of organisations, and I suppose you framed it as, if you were designing a think tank, what would you design today if you had a blank sheet of paper? And I think that's an interesting question, but I don't think it's the right question, because I don't believe that there is one single blueprint or one single model for a think tank or for any of these sorts of organisations. I think what we need is a rather mixed economy, of course I'd say that, a rather mixed economy of different organisations that have different focus and different emphasis. And we can't all be the same, but we've all got to be pulling in the same direction. And so, to my mind, we need to think about this as a system of different institutions together, each of whom might have their different role, but don't all need to be identical. So I think it's more about how do you design the infrastructure to change the country and to promote progressive economics, rather than necessarily how do you design a single organisation to do that. That said, I do think there are some characteristics that need to be in common. So I think the observation, and it was once an observation and now it's a deafening shout, is that the sort of elite, the bubble, has been too closed off from society. And that is a very powerful point, the need for these institutions such as think tanks. I lead IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research, absolutely a traditional think tank, founded in 1988. I think it's the largest progressive think tank that covers all of domestic policy in the UK. And absolutely, we need to be much more rooted in society. So the first appointment I made when I became director in April was somebody to lead a new communities group within IPPR. Because the observation that what we have at the moment is that we sort of set the agenda for ourselves and do some interesting research. And that's quite important in a way, right? To say, well, an independent group of people have a view on what matters and get on with it. But I want to build communities of interest around our work to say, well, what matters to you? What's important? What are the real questions, right? Start off with the questions. Secondly, to ask what are the answers to those questions and not assume that at the think tank at the top that we have all the answers. And then use it as a way to disseminate the findings that have been co-created together. And that's something I've done at IPPR, which in many respects is a very traditional think tank as is commonly understood. So I think there are these characteristics that are being much more deeply rooted in the communities that we seek to serve and influence that need to apply absolutely across all different organisations. But I don't think that there is one specific model that we need to have that needs to be applied to every single institution. I guess what I'm saying is I think there's absolutely a place for NEF and where it's going and where it's being taken by Mark, which I think is a really fantastic and energising vision. I think there's a place for IPPR that looks a little bit differently. I think the characteristics that we need, all of us together, is to be much more rooted in the communities that we seek to influence and we seek to serve. Thank you.
Sunder, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation. I'm going to follow with the panel in not having the answer to the question we've been asked, certainly not in 5 minutes, and therefore throwing out questions about how we do that. British Future, just to let you know about that, is independent, non-partisan think tank, so-called, so clearly not the answer, being a think tank. But the mission is greater confidence in a Britain that can be inclusive, that can be welcoming, and that can be fair by engaging with the people who don't have that confidence today, who are anxious, not confident about the terms on which we might have a future that looked more like that. So in a way, you know, none of you are the target group here, but you're part of the answer about how we reach the groups we need to reach. But challenges for change makers in the autumn of 2016, well, you know, we've all got different types of change we're working on, and it's going to be really difficult because the referendum is one of the biggest things that's happened in our country for 50 years. So it's a reset moment. So the stakes get higher, and we want to influence what happens. There are things we want to defend that we fear losing. Hopefully some of us still want to make progress too, but that might get harder. It's illuminated the ways in which our society is divided by class, by age, by place, really actually by education and worldview and identity in our society. So we all want to defend values of openness and tolerance, but I think we want to depolarize that take the heat out of it, not to, which would be quite easy right now, get hold of a different group of people who feel angry and lost and polarise it again. And there's a feeling, as Mark has said, of a stark imbalance in feelings of power and control. So we know to achieve that we need to spread a sense of power and autonomy. So are we the types of institutions, do we have the types of approaches that are fit for purpose to do that? Well no. As everyone said, no, we're not. No, we don't at the moment. You know, quick show of hands, obvious point, but let's just demonstrate. Who voted Remain in the room? Who voted Leave? Glad we've got some. Glad we've got some people. You can't depolarise a society when 90% of you are at one flank of the polarised debate you're trying to depolarise. And the same thing applies to the point about empowerment. The left and progressives have talked a lot about empowerment, and people have not felt empowered by the offers of empowerment, or at least, you know, some people talk about proportional representation, and it has not felt as empowering as a referendum on the European Union when you can vote to leave it, which brought 3 million more people back into the electorate. There are lots of ideas in the new economy that will, you know, be different and not austerity and so on, and lots of people working on what they are. And none of them have felt as empowering to jump back another generation as a chance to buy your council house if you want to. So if the offers to empower people don't make them feel they'll be more powerful, they're not going to get out and campaign for you and vote for you. And the political centre of gravity has shifted away from, you know, most of the people in this room, I guess. I won't do an opinion poll, because there are plenty of those in the newspapers, but it's going to be difficult, actually. The kaleidoscope is shifting when the centre of gravity is on the right of centre. And so everybody here, however much we engage locally bringing about change, risks being placed in the position of being defensive, of being voices of critique, of complaint, where people think there's quite a lot in the critiques and the complaints, actually, because it doesn't feel fair to people, but they don't believe that we have constructive, viable alternatives with the levels of support that can actually bring about those changes at scale. So there will be massively diminishing returns if we carry on doing what we're doing, and much more so, which I think we haven't realised because of Brexit. Because, you know, your think tank report with a good piece of research and a bit of policy and pop up on the Tape Day programme, and your NGO campaign with, you know, a petition that people have campaigned and now everyone says we must do that. There is much, much less oxygen and energy for any of that now, because 90% of government is going to be trying to deal with Brexit. Parliamentary legislation incorporating all of European law. It's just going to crowd out so much of what's been happening. So everybody will say now more than ever, now that this has happened, the thing that I already thought was really important should be even more important. And that's what everyone will say. And if you haven't got broader allies, broader alliances than you had, then that's going less far than it did before. So what should we do about it? Not, in my view, lots of new organisations, but different ways for organisations to work together, to think strategically about local change, about national change, about politics, about what happens. On polarisation and power, it's really easy to say what needs to happen, but obviously it's incredibly hard work to do it. And it's the journey that NEF is going on. You're going to, if you want to empower people, you've got to have empowerment led by the people who are going to get more power, not just by the people who benignly talk about the need to give power away and share it out. So the fact that we are essentially movements of benign graduates who paternalistically feel that other people should have better lives, you know, that is not good enough. We don't want to lose that support. There's a growing voice in our society. You know, there are more graduates than ever there were before. That's why education's become polarising. But, you know, that's really serious. And on the polarisation, we've just got to co-produce ideas of why it's polarised and what we do about it with people who are on both sides of the pole. And so we can't, you know, I'm not saying, you know, 16 million people who vote to Remain have got a very important voice, but they'll have a more important voice still if we can forge new alliances. There's a more difficult question, though, which is what to do about the dominance of the right politically, because there are three things I think that need to happen, and two of them I think have been talked about. One is plan an alternative, and let's be fair, it's not a 4-year project. It'd be nice to think it's an 8 or 10-year project, and it probably isn't even that. And people in this room will have to work out how to have viable alternatives with broad reach. In the meantime, the second thing people will do is build power from below, engage locally, find places to do something useful in the meantime. That's all correct as well. What we're not talking about, because it's more uncomfortable, is some people have to engage with the people who are holding power at a reset moment in our society. And if no one's doing that as well, actually, then by the time you come back, actually everything will have shifted. So every movement, I think, will need its idealists and its utopians and its change makers and its local builders. And actually it's pragmatists too. And if you're at the radical structural change end, then you're not going to get enormous amounts from the people who are in power. If you think your cause about climate or poverty or demographic change or age or people not being tortured or foundational human rights shouldn't be the sorts of things that are up for grabs in elections, 6 decades of having refugee protection in our country, then it'd be absolutely mad if all of your support was on one side of the political spectrum and the losing side. So there will actually be no successful defence of things you want to defend or advance of things you want to advance without a much stronger locus, actually, of engagement with the people who have got power, who are not in this room, as well as to build alternative sources of power so you could do something different long term. Thanks.